So last time you were here, actually, and you wrote this in your excellent cover story, which is going to be on the shelves this week in the New Statesman. The last time you were here, it was during the dying days of Boris Johnson's government. And I think every week, because we recorded weekly back then. Now we're daily.
I know.
just to warn you. Yeah. So we would discuss every week the mood among MPs darkening, over his premiership, how everything was going wrong. And actually, in your cover story, you draw a parallel between that atmosphere that you remember then and the conversations that you're having with people now about Keir Starmer's leadership. So can you tell our listeners and our viewers about those parallels?
I know. I mean, even when I was writing the cover, I listened to one of our old episodes, one of the last ones that you and Stephen and I did, and we were talking about how Boris Johnson had managed to stagger on until recess, because we had been talking about how Boris Johnson seemed doomed and in crisis for maybe 5 or 6 months. And so, but we weren't wrong to say that, because he was eventually toppled.
Yeah.
And really, I think I've been thinking a lot about that moment when it felt like the mood turned for Boris Johnson among MPs. Was just a feeling in Westminster that MPs treated him with contempt, or talked about him with contempt privately to us for the first time, previously loyal people. Suddenly you had cabinet ministers who seemed to be sort of positioning themselves for the leadership right under his nose. And just that question about whether the Prime Minister should be replaced, how that could happen, when it would happen, was just the constant conversation. And basically the thesis of the cover is that we're in a similar moment again with Keir Starmer, that mood has shifted again. And I feel like maybe it's different. Keir Starmer is not Boris Johnson, but with Boris Johnson, once the genie was out of the bottle, it never went back in, even though we spent months talking about how his leadership was faltering, and yet he kind of weathered Partygate for months and months and months until the Chris Pincher scandal finally got him. So really, it's the whole cover story is I felt, for my first cover, I went to Tom, our editor, last week while everyone was really talking about the budget and two-child benefit cap, and said, I think that we need to say this. And it felt like we were going out a little bit on a limb to sort of just call it as we see it. Keir Starmer's leadership is, he's in trouble. Even if it doesn't look like that publicly, privately, it feels like the bottom has dropped out of his support in Parliament. There's just a feeling the leadership chat is constant. We need to call it. And then by the time we were actually going to press, it felt really timely because it's all completely blown up. Number 10 kind of did us a favour, confirming the thesis, saying Keir Starmer would fight a leadership challenge and pointing the finger at Wes Streeting, saying he was going to launch a coup.
Perfect timing.
Perfect timing.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Number 10, and the people there who are listening. Done us a favour. And there are some really extraordinary quotes in your piece. Before we go on to the leadership question, one MP says, if the Parliamentary Labour Party's relationship with Keir Starmer was a marriage, then they're at the staying together for the kids stage, which I thought was a really good line. And an aide told you he, referring to Keir Starmer, doesn't understand politics or the Labour Party. He doesn't have a vision. He's a terrible communicator. We've always known these things about him, but we put up with it when we were doing okay against the Tories. I mean, there are so many other spicy quotes in there, but I just wanted to bring some of those to our listeners' attention. And I don't want you to reveal your sources, Ailbhe, of course, but can you give our listeners a bit of a sense of how these conversations come about, and also about whether you feel that they mark a change in the way that your contacts have been speaking to you about the situation over the past few months?
Definitely. So I don't think I'm revealing too much when I say that there was a particular MP, there are 405 of them, so I don't think this is too revealing. a month or two ago, when that reshuffle had just taken place and MPs felt kind of alienated by the new operation in the whips and various changes. And this is just sort of right after the Peter Mandelson stuff. An MP who's normally almost boringly loyal, dare I say, where you still chat, but you sort of don't expect to get much that's that revealing. An MP just sort of summoned me into their office and said, like, I'm so sick of this. I'm done sort of pretending. I'll be like really helpful to you from now on.
Oh, wow.
And I would say there are lots of people like this, hiding in plain sight, not being approached by the whips, not being taken in for their breakfasts or their lunches or their one-on-one chats with the Prime Minister, because they're seen as the loyalists. Now, this is not just the sort of obvious rebels. There's a really, really deep feeling of discontent in the Parliamentary Labour Party. It doesn't mean all of them want to topple the leader, but you'd be hard-pushed to find any happy Labour MP at the moment, I would say. I can't think of any.
That's really interesting. Yeah, thanks so much for taking us into how these kind of conversations came about. And it shows that it's important to always cultivate your relationship, even with the loyal MPs.
Play the long game.
Yeah.
One day they'll crack.
They'll crack. It pays off. And so what are the main things, before we move on to Wes Streeting, what are the main things that have led to this tempestuous atmosphere, do you think? Because in your piece, everything's mentioned from winter fuel to Starmer's non-committal attendance at COP lately. I mean, all of these things have been coming under criticism. What do you think has been the main thing that's been driving it?
Oh, so that paragraph was so long at first, and Tom was like, "We can't mention everything. There's too much."
Spoil sport.
It would have been the whole story if we'd gone through everything. I mean, I think everyone sees the winter fuel thing as the sort of the original sin of this Labour government. It kind of sort of immediately punctured that very brief honeymoon that the government had, and was intended to signal toughness, but it kind of signalled meanness, I think, in the view of a lot of people. And, you know, now they've U-turned on that, but took a very long time. I think that was very hard for Labour MPs, especially the new ones. That's sort of ancient history, but there's been so much since, you know. I think welfare was pretty difficult, and in a way that was a sort of genie out of the bottle moment, because if Labour MPs had, you know, if they hadn't reached that last minute settlement with the rebels, the government would have lost the vote, which is crazy for a newly elected government with a huge majority. But I think, you know, it's also things like Peter Mandelson. I think MPs find that really difficult, really hard to sit through Prime Minister's questions, you know, stony-faced behind the Prime Minister while he defended Peter Mandelson, who was under pressure for his relationship with one of the world's most famous sex offenders. Yeah. And, you know, and then they sat through Peter Kyle on the broadcast round saying that appointing Mandelson, given his, you know, despite his Epstein links, had been a risk worth taking. You know, I think that things like that have been really difficult. It's worth saying some of those MPs were okay defending those decisions and actually felt just frustrated that they'd sort of embarrassed themselves holding the line for so long, going out on the airwaves defending it, and then the government U-turned. So it's MPs from all the different persuasions. But there's a bit in the cover story where I say that a lot of MPs, still not all of them, but a lot of them sort of feel like number 10 doesn't respect or like them. They've kind of slowly reached that realisation over the past year, rightly or wrongly. And now they say the feeling's mutual. And so that's where the kind of, I think, you know, I talk a bit about contempt, this idea sort of running through the piece. Yes. The tone is pretty contemptuous. My phone is full of pretty mean, contemptuous, pretty personal quotes about people. It's always hard to know, I think, as a political journalist, how much you want to use them and share them, because, you know, it's quite a fraught political atmosphere, and, you know, we talk sometimes about sort of wanting politics to be kinder, but I think it just needs to be said that there's sort of a pretty vitriolic undertone to the way MPs now talk about number 10, which means that even though there are some new people in the building who are trying to do engagement with the parliamentary party, you know, I'm not sure how much of a difference it's making. One person said to me that they're overstating the effect that warm white wine with the boss can have. And, you know, I think in a way, maybe it's too late for some of them. They already feel like, you know, they once said, we know how they feel about us now, you know. Right. It's too late.
Yeah, and contempt famously is the killer of a relationship, according to, you know, relationship psychology, isn't it?
Which was the opening line of the piece. Yeah, a bit of relationship advice for you there.
Yeah. Maybe that can be a new format on the podcast. Love Dr. Ailbhe. So your story came out, and it was the perfect timing, because what you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast was all of this briefing suddenly appearing from number 10, claiming Wes Streeting is looking to mount a leadership challenge. And so suddenly, you know, the prospect of Keir Starmer's position is one that every journalist can pose to any Labour politician that they speak to. So what are you hearing about Wes Streeting in particular?
Well, firstly, on this, number 10 pointing the finger at Wes Streeting phraseology, number 10 is now kind of insisting that it has nothing to do with them. If you look closely at the original stories, I mean, in our piece we say a senior number 10 official says that Starmer would fight any challenge against him.
Yeah.
So that bit, lots of places have, if you ask a senior person, number 10, the question, there's just one obvious answer, and and in our piece they which was written before all of this, they sort of talk about the risks of a leadership challenge, how that would be destabilising to the bond markets, how the UK is seen, internationally as a stable government with a huge majority, and MPs shouldn't rock the boat on that. So some of that was already out there, but then the new thing is sort of the pointing the finger at Wes Streeting and accusing him of a leadership plot for after the budget. And now number 10 is sort of saying that wasn't anything to do with them. And people inside number 10 are distancing themselves from that part.
Okay.
But it's fair to say that the Streeting camp are not entirely impressed by that. And, I have received some screenshots of the relevant articles where the bits about Wes Streeting are attributed to number 10 sources. It's not actually a Starmer allies or senior government. Where some of the pieces have now changed. Interestingly, where it's senior government figures rather than number 10 in some of the mentions. But I don't think that the people around Wes Streeting are entirely convinced that number 10 didn't have some involvement on that. But I should say that certainly they maintain that they've made this argument about how no one should challenge Keir for the leadership and he would contest it, but they're distancing themselves from that Streeting part.
Okay, that's really interesting to know. Thanks for clarifying it. But the fact is that some people in senior positions within the party, whether or not they are, geographically located in number 10, want to try and smoke out what they see as Wes Streeting manoeuvring for some kind of future leadership bid. I think we can say that for
exactly.
certain.
Yeah, 100%, and it has not worked.
Yeah,
it has backfired. I mean, now that we've kind of laid the groundwork that number 10 is really distancing themselves from this, rightly or wrongly, all the MPs think it was Morgan McSweeney, and my phone is absolutely full of people who used to speak pretty admiringly of him, the man who led them to their general election success last year. It's full of people like that now being pretty unimpressed with him. And, I had lots of messages, things like, Morgan has lost the plot. What is going on? This is so sad. It's sort of patronising. This is so sad. He used to be a brilliant strategist. Now what is he doing? As one person said, it was sort of the biggest act of self-defeat since Brexit.
Right.
But definitely. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that Wes Streeting had the morning round this morning, so he was due to face questions from journalists on TV and radio. I think that you could maybe deduce from the timing that there was an intention to force him on the broadcast round to declare his loyalty to Keir Starmer and to rule out a leadership challenge. And several people have said it was sort of an attempt, or it looks like an attempt to embarrass him and humiliate him a bit. But Wes Streeting is pretty good at the broadcast round. It's actually his probably sort of arena of maximum strength as a politician. And really, I think, speaking to a huge range of different people in the Labour Party this morning, I think that people think he sort of strengthened his position and, called for whoever had done that briefing to resign, said he was sure that Keir Starmer hated it and would want nothing to do with it. But actually, I think people think that it has really backfired, and certainly MPs that I have spoken to, I think would be more inclined for a leadership contest now than they would have been 24 hours ago.
Yeah, that's
and
really
if anything, the whole prospect of a leadership contest, it's now top of the agenda. It was the 8:10 interview on the Today programme. Our cover could have come out and number 10 could have said, this is all kind of gossipy nonsense. But actually, now they're trying to ward off a leadership coup. In a way, they've fired the starting gun on a leadership contest.
In a way, they've legitimised the conversation about it. Rather than saying this is just Westminster tittle-tattle and there's more important things to talk about.
And I mean, one person said to me, I think that there are still some people who try to make it about Wes Streeting and who maintain that he was plotting something, which he denies, and say, this was so pathetic of Wes. What was he trying to do? A few weeks before the budget, we would look so unstable. I think that some people are trying to frame it as Wes Streeting started this, we didn't start it. But I don't think to most people that is how it has landed. And the leadership speculation is not just Wes Streeting. There's so many names doing the rounds. And as you say, that whole conversation has been legitimised now.
Go on, give us some of those names, Ailbhe.
Well,
I know this is a whole separate cover story, so don't scoop yourself.
Yeah, or a run of sort of 10 stories if we take them one by one. I think the main question is, who would the soft left candidate be? I don't know if they know. And I'm struck that when I speak to people in government or MPs, they sort of ask me what I think other people are up to. Would Angela run? Do you think Ed really wants to do it? What do you think Louise is up to? Does Louise Haigh want to be Chancellor? She wrote that sort of economic essay for the New Statesman not that long ago, which I read from my previous role. Is that positioning to be Chancellor, or actually does she want to have a go at it? The names doing the rounds: Angela Rayner, Louise Haigh, Ed Miliband, John Healing, Al Carnes, Defence Minister.
Okay.
Miata Fambulla, but I think, she's a junior minister seen as an Ed Miliband ally. Whether it would be, this year or, soon, or whether that's more for a few years' time. There's so many names doing around. And then Shabana Mahmood, the other big contender from the right of the party. I don't know if I'm forgetting anyone. But, there's just... Oh, and Lucy Powell, is she sort of a front runner? Is she a sort of stalking horse for Ed Miliband or Andy Burnham? Would she want to stand in her own right? This is the constant conversation in the Labour Party. Just honestly, basically every conversation I have rattles through these names. Yeah. And, with various bits of gossip about where their campaigns are or aren't. All of those people would deny that they are standing, by the way. I should emphasise. But it's just constant.
So something that struck me in your piece, Ailbhe, was how much MPs feel Keir doesn't want to know. There's that phrase that's used repeatedly. Can you elaborate on what that means?
So I thought that this was an interesting idea to explore, in a way to tie in with the idea that he maybe doesn't realise that a leadership challenge is looming. And obviously, as we came closer to deadline, it was really clear that number 10 did know that something is up and that has erupted. But I think that this is a theme that I've been sort of aware of for quite a while, covering the Labour Party, and it felt like a good time to just get into it. I think it's several things. I mean, there's obviously the way Keir Starmer doesn't really know how rude his MPs are about him behind his back, which is part of the fingers in the ears thing. But the other thing is just sort of the way he runs his team and the way number 10 is run. So going back even to opposition, a then shadow cabinet minister approached Starmer about something pretty important. I'm not going to elaborate. And felt that this was something that the leader just personally needed to grip. And he replied, I'm told, speak to Morgan about it. And they were pretty surprised by that. And then again, around the welfare vote, around winter fuel, a cabinet minister approached Starmer saying, I think that this could be really tricky. And he said, I'm told, speak to Rachel about it. And so there's actually a bit of a theme. I've heard loads of other stories like that of cabinet ministers and other people thinking that there are issues that really he needs to grip personally, and him saying, speak to Morgan, speak to Rachel, speak to X or Y, and him kind of not wanting to know. And some of that is, as British Prime Minister, he's a pretty busy man. And it's a sort of, I put this as someone in number 10 and they just said, obviously the British Prime Minister delegates, the country would fall to its knees if he didn't. So in a way, part of it is that everyone who works for Keir Starmer talks about, says things like, obviously Keir doesn't have much time to explain why Starmer hasn't really been involved in something. But it's kind of deeper than that too. This is sort of like a lot of people have told me about how Starmer likes his advisors to reach a house view before they go to him. So he basically wants his cabinet ministers and his advisors to have already decided between themselves what the policy should be and then recommend it to him. And I'm told by multiple people that he doesn't really like adjudicating conflict between cabinet ministers or between advisors, which is kind of what happens a lot in government, and it is for the Prime Minister to make that call. And one person, inside Number 10, said to me that they think that this system has ended up benefiting particular advisors over the past few years, because if the Prime Minister doesn't really want that much information, wants people to reach a house view, he doesn't want to be involved in the conflict, you can kind of cherry pick what information you bring to him and bounce him into the decision you think he should take.
Yeah, and the person with the loudest voice will obviously dictate what the house view is in that conflict or that dispute.
So one person kind of punchily described it to me as a kind of infantilizing system. And that was before the welfare debacle. And after it, Starmer kind of seemed to show a flash of awareness that it hadn't really been working, and told people in Number 10 that he wanted to be given more policy detail and earlier. And there's been this reorganisation of Number 10 that took place around the reshuffle, so about 8 weeks ago. And now there is a kind of flatter structure. It's sort of designed to give more people direct access to the Prime Minister. But in practice, I gather nothing has really changed.
Right.
For a few reasons. He still wants people to reach a house view before they go to him. I'm told, again, by senior people in Number 10, that's still the case. And then also you've got this new character in Number 10 in Darren Jones.
Yeah, this is the part of your piece that I found particularly interesting, actually, because Darren Jones, who we should remind our listeners was Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and then during this rearrangement of the team was brought into this new role, Chief Secretary to the Prime Minister, that didn't really exist as a role. And this was supposed to help what was seen as a sort of chaotic Number 10. But yeah, tell me what you've discovered about the way that his role is actually working.
Basically, some senior people in Number 10 have quietly reached the conclusion that it's not working with Darren Jones. But they don't want to tell Keir Starmer that. There has been so much churn. I list in the cover story some of the people who have left Number 10 lately. It's quite a lot. There has been so much churn that this can't really be another example of, we appoint someone and then we change our minds a few months later. There's no suggestion that Darren Jones is going anywhere, but still people are having that conversation that it's not quite working. I'm told Morgan McSweeney likes having Darren Jones around, that he likes working really closely with a politician. During the election campaign, he and Pat McFadden sat side by side all day, every day. Not always talking, but sort of just really, really like sort of two heads together working on everything. And before that, Morgan McSweeney had that with Shabana Mahmood, who was campaign coordinator for a few years. So he likes that. And now he has that in Darren Jones, someone to work closely with. Another person did say to me, there is another politician inside Number 10 who should be doing that with Morgan.
Another elected representative.
Yes. So, there's clearly not that close bouncing ideas off each other relationship between Morgan and the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Because, again, Starmer doesn't have much time, as they all say. So I think Morgan McSweeney, people around him say that he's liking the new arrangement, but I think that Darren Jones is putting noses out of joint. There have been some personality clashes. I've got a quote in the piece, someone saying that he's a details man around people who aren't details people, and he's exposing people.
Right.
Darren, source close to Darren Jones is keen to emphasise that didn't come from them. That's not his view of his colleagues. But certainly he's been shaking things up inside Number 10. I was telling you the other day that he has a sort of toggle thing where he's a big believer in live data.
Yeah.
So he has things in the middle of a meeting. He will have various sort of literally toggles that he can move, where if you move the amount of investment or you change the timeline, you see how the graph changes, or you see the live impact assessment. And I think it means that, officials or other colleagues of Darren Jones can, they used to be able to say, oh yeah, we'll take that away and we'll test that for you. And now he can say, no, let's test it now. And I think it's sort of just putting noses out of joint. And then I think that there's just the separate bigger thing of, he was brought in to deliver on the Prime Minister's priorities and reform the centre and drive change through. And just a few other people have said to me, no one could really do that job. The centre is too hard to reform.
Yeah. Difficult as well for someone who is a details-oriented politician, an elected representative, so they also have to have, public opinion and their constituents' interests in mind. But also someone who's got his own ambition, right? He's seen as an ambitious guy, and that's the kind of thing that can also put noses out of joint, whether or not you have a special toggle or not.
And that is another quote in the piece, one insider saying, I don't think that they appreciated how nakedly ambitious Darren is.
Right.
I mean, you could argue that all politicians should be ambitious, but I think that there's a bit of a sting in that quote. I don't think that it's a coincidence that Darren Jones gets these kinds of briefings when his previous job was to say no to people. He was sort of the Mr. No in the Treasury. He did all those negotiations, and it means he doesn't, it means that I think that there's probably some baggage from, even though those negotiations went sort of okay, I think that he doesn't have the easiest relationship with colleagues as a result of that.
Yeah, and you list a lot of the positions in Number 10 that have had so much churn over the past year or so. And now there's this contention over Darren Jones's role and all sorts of disquiet about the way that Number 10 works and that structure and coming to a house view. I mean, in the end, is there not a point where you start to blame the person making these appointments, the person at the top, rather than those around him?
I think so. And I think that, to take us full circle, that's kind of what the piece is about. That today I have had a lot of messages about Morgan McSweeney, but in general, I think that a lot of it is more strikingly personal to Keir Starmer himself. I think if there were any more briefings or if people just hear these, these sort of briefings about Darren Jones, I think they'll just sort of think, oh, we can't keep blaming other people.
Yeah.
Everyone kind of says, there was a story about Chris Wormald, the cabinet secretary, the most senior civil servant, who was appointed by Keir Starmer about a year ago.
Yeah.
There have been these stories that he could be replaced. Again, that doesn't inspire confidence in the boss, in his decisions. It ends up not really reflecting on Chris Wormald so much as it does on Keir Starmer himself.
Yeah, it's an irony, isn't it? Because one of the main criticisms about Starmer, particularly in opposition, was that he was too managerial, that he wasn't charismatic enough. He wanted to lead Britain like a manager or a technocrat would, rather than a more charismatic form of leadership. But actually, it doesn't seem like he's that good at management from what you've been telling me on this podcast.
Yeah.
Perhaps he needs to be more managerial. I never thought that I'd be arguing that.
Well, it just, with, for example, the chaos of the past 24 hours, that doesn't reflect well on him either way, whether he knew or didn't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Because, if he didn't know, why not? Why has he let this happen? And if he did know, if he seriously thinks that Wes Streeting is launching a coup against him, why is he still in the cabinet? He's just stood up at Prime Minister's questions and said that, I can't remember his form of words, but that he didn't agree with those briefings against Wes Streeting. But either way, it doesn't speak to his authority. And a lot of people have been saying to me that, again, the dysfunction today speaks to the dysfunction in Number 10 in the building. A lot of this would never have happened when X was there. Sort of people missing all those names that are listed in the piece who have left in the past year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just lastly, before I let you go back to all of your brilliant reporting, how would you summarise Labour's 16 months in power? I mean, you've obviously been working at another publication for a lot of that time. I mean, what conclusion have you come to so far? Do you think it's likely that there'll just be a one-term government? I know it's an unfair question, but I'd love to know.
I can't see beyond May in that I think that the lobby and the British media in general has got a bit ahead of itself. Because, you know, this time in the last Parliament, when I was last at the New Statesman, Boris Johnson was, no, I guess by the time I was leaving, Boris Johnson was falling in the polls. But roughly at this point in the last Parliament, Boris Johnson was still doing well and Keir Starmer was trailing in the polls.
Yeah.
I think that we're kind of too early in the cycle to be able to say definitively what the next election will look like. I mean, Keir Starmer probably won't lead the Labour Party into the next election. Kemi Badenoch probably won't lead the Conservatives into the next election. There are so many things left to happen that I guess I'm, you know, I can see the polls like anyone else, but I guess I'm sort of not looking ahead that far. I think that the main thing is May. There's the budget and then May.
And we should remind our listeners what's up for election in May.
May, local elections in like lots of England, London, everywhere else, and then the Scottish and Welsh elections. So it's looking, you know, lots of Labour people think it might be okay in Scotland, but I think that they're expecting to come in for a real drubbing in very different parts of England, so in London, but also in sort of typical red wall places. And then they're expecting to be absolutely annihilated in Wales. Yeah. And, you know, one person in the cover story, I quote, says, "I don't think that any Labour leader who led us to come third in Wales would deserve to stay as Prime Minister."
Yeah.
So I think that even if, you know, Starmer weathers the next few weeks, I'm sure we'll speak again about the budget that's quite soon and is another moment of difficulty. But even if he survives all of that, I think that it's May is the big moment when I don't think that Labour will do so well.